Thank you very much, Martin, for that kind introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me. So yes, I'm going to try and share a few insights from the Times Higher Education World University Rankings. I have a slide deck. I'm getting a little bit of support on moving the slides forward, so forgive me if I keep pausing to move the slides on. Let's have a look at the first slide, please. So I often have to begin these presentations with a bit of an apology. This is the proliferation of rankings that we've seen in the years since 2004, when Times Higher Education first produced a list of the world's top 200 universities. Under my stewardship, I'm slightly embarrassed to say we've moved from a top 200 list to multiple different lists by region, emerging economies, for example, Asia, Latin America. By theme, we have an impact ranking based on universities' delivery of the Sustainable Development Goals. We have reputation-based rankings. We've moved from ranking 200 universities to 3,500 universities, from just a few thousand data points to 10 million data points. And a lot of universities find the proliferation of metrics and management by metrics to be quite frustrating and challenging. But I passionately believe that rankings are fulfilling an important role in our community and providing data-driven insights to help us understand the changing environment we're operating in and to provide insights. And I'll explain a little bit later on the insights I can share about Ireland and particularly Asia, and highlight some, I hope, some low-hanging fruit and some opportunities. If we move to the next slide, it will just, I think, help us to understand the context in which we're operating. How have we got to a situation where Times Higher can publish dozens of rankings with millions of data points? Well, Ben Wildalski, when he was the director of higher education at the Rockefeller Institute, talked about this innate human desire to rank, rankings man. Why do we rank schools or sports teams or washing machines, for that matter? We need to go back into human history to understand that, almost to the caveman era. Homo sapiens is a tribal primate, he wrote. We love pecking orders that help us understand who's up, who's down, and where we stand ourselves. This is why somewhere in the midst of time, rankings man was born. Sadly, it usually is a man. We're always ranking each other, comparing each other. But on a more serious note, if we look at the next slide, the roots of the ranking actually came from a review by the UK government back in 2003, the Lambert Review, which was about actually university business interaction. But within that, Richard Lambert, recognized there was a real lack of comparative data for universities. So, government policy couldn't be assessed in terms of international competition. We're in a global knowledge economy, and there was a very strong sense that we were benchmarking at a national level. We were comparing each other across national, regional borders, and not at a global level. But it's an absolutely global market for talent. It's a global environment for knowledge creation. So he recommended the creation of a league table to actually support government decision-making and government policy decision-making. Strangely enough, not as a consumer tool for students. Obviously, the rankings have become a phenomenally powerful tool for students, and we get many tens of millions of students looking at our rankings, but we just conceived them actually to support universities and stakeholders to understand performance. If we move to the next slide, it just really points to the flagship ranking, the Times Higher Education ranking, but a fun image just to say that, I think that universities do need that harsh reality, that external viewpoint. This is a classic image that it doesn't matter how others see you, as long as you see yourself as the big tiger. But I think it's the opposite in global higher education. There's a lot of attention on you, and actually how you perceive yourself needs to be validated and sense checked with hard data. Next slide, please. So the flagship, and we can move straight on to the next slide. The flagship is the World University Rankings. It's the annual report where we look at research-intensive universities across the world. I think there might be a delay, but if we could flip straight across to the next slide. It really is a huge piece of work. For the 2021 rankings we published just a couple of weeks ago on the 2nd of September, we're ranking more than 1,500 universities, almost 2,000 institutions took part. We're evaluating almost 14 million individual research papers, 86 million citations, and we're drawing on reputation votes from 22,000 scholars all across the world. Next slide, please. And the results are, rather predictable at the top, but here we can see the methodology in detail. We have 13 separate performance indicators covering the full range of a university's activity, 5 indicators of teaching worth about 30% of the ranking methodology. Research and citations are driving this, but we also look at international outlook and industry income. So we're trying to get a holistic view of what we would describe as a world-class research university. This is research-led. It's about the knowledge economy. It's about universities contributing to new knowledge creation. And that's an unapologetic look at what is probably a traditional research-intensive institution. They are operating at a global level, attracting global talent, and publishing research of global significance. Next slide, please. So I think this will give us the top 10. And this is the aspect that I think is highly predictable. Oxford, Stanford, Harvard at the top, attracting worldwide headlines. But if we move quickly to the next slide, we can start to try and unpick the more interesting things. I think the headlines of who's number 1, who's number 2 is really rather dull these days. We know who the great research-led universities are, but what really gets exciting is when you start unpicking the data and looking at trends. And I think probably the story of the 2021 edition of the rankings from the 2nd of September is actually this continuing shift in the balance of power from the west to the east. You can see the gray line there is the European universities represented in the top 200 of the rankings between 2016 and 2021. You can see there a modest but steady decline in the representation of Europe. The middle line, the orange, is North America, steady but a very modest decline. But what's really significant for me is that yellow line at the bottom, the rise of Asia and the Asia Pacific region. It's been a very significant trend that Asia is taking more of those top 200 places. North America and Europe are taking fewer of those places. And if we move to the next slide, we can start to understand what's happening here. And the key really for me is China. Mainland China has had a phenomenal period in rankings. The investment over several decades into excellence initiatives, the program to attract the diaspora from China back into Chinese universities, huge investment campaigns, picking winners and investing in them has been incredibly successful. Those top 2 lines are Tsinghua and Peking. And you can see actually they've moved from towards the bottom of the top 50 into the higher echelons. We had our first ever top 20 Chinese university in the rankings this year. Tsinghua made 20th place, a very symbolic move. But it's the second wave. It's the institutions that have moved from outside the top 200 very comfortably into that top 150, top 100 mark. That's really been phenomenal. It's not just the Beijing powerhouses. It's the Fudans, the Shanghai Jiao Tongs, other institutions. A phenomenal success story for China. If we look at the next slide, you can see where this sort of rebalancing is taking place. The US are extremely dominant in the rankings, still take all the upper echelons places. But this next slide, I think, will show the movement of China compared to the US. Here we go. Sorry, there's a momentarily delay here. So the blue lines are the American universities and the 200 to 300 band, and the red lines are the Chinese ones. So you can really see that tremendous polarization in those middle ranking institutions. There's a big shift taking place here, and it's a rebalancing of power from west to east. Next slide, please. Just want to reflect on that a little bit with regards to Ireland. That's been a stable period for Ireland, but clearly the context is very modest decline. And we must say that decline doesn't mean the institutions are getting worse. It just means relative to the rest of the world, they're perhaps not improving as rapidly. So those lines are the Irish institutions. So you've got some fairly stable lines there, but a downward pressure. And I think that's just mounting competition across the globe. Investment plans paying off in developing countries in particular, obviously China being the key, but also South Korea. Outstanding strength, of course, in Hong Kong, outstanding strength in Singapore as well. If we look at the next slide, we can try and unpick a little bit about what's happening. So this looks at the 13 metrics we use for the world rankings. Those metrics I showed you earlier, and this is a waterfall graph from one year to the next. The blue is the overall change for the whole of mainland China. So you can see there very significant improvement for China as a nation. And the green bars are the areas of improvement. The red is an area where they've lost ground. And you can see it's only on a very simple metric, faculty-student ratio. There's been a tiny, modest decline relative to the rest of the world. But you can see here what's driving China's success. Primarily, it's citation impact. The influence, the quality of research published by China is improving significantly. And the next bar you can see there, publications per faculty, is really important because that's the quantity alongside the quality. So China's producing more publications per head, more research outputs per head, and that's of more high quality. And that's really driving the success of China in the rankings, and of course, driving China's success in an international knowledge economy. The next slide just compares Ireland, and you can see it's a much more challenging picture for Ireland. Ireland did improve. It has had a very modest improvement of 0.1 points on the scale, but that's a tiny improvement. Very successfully increasing productivity, publications per staff there, but not the same corresponding improvement in citations. And you can see if you go off to the far left of the screen, that red bar is citation impact. So actually, relative to the rest of the world, relative to other nations, Irish research is not quite as impactful as it should be. So we do need to address why is it that Irish research isn't getting cited as much as others. And we talk about citations being the metric. This is all normalized by subject. So it's very much about how many times that research is shared, is cited by other scholars, is building new knowledge, which is a very strong proxy for quality. But it's all normalized by subject mix and the different innate citation habits across disciplines. And that's where we are looking at 86 million data points there. If we look at the next slide, I'll wrap up very shortly with a couple of concluding thoughts. The first, the key thought really is about how Ireland and Asia can network more. This is an image that looks at our reputation survey. So I said at the beginning, 22,000 individual scholars give us votes every single year about who are the great universities. So we ask people in their own native language, 15 languages. We use United Nations data to unpick the global demographics of scholarship. So we're asking the right proportion of people in China and Singapore, Australia, and America. Literally, who is the greatest universities for teaching and who are the greatest universities for research? And it gives us a fascinating insight into the prestige, the reputation of universities among peers. And this shows the red lines are votes coming from Ireland to other nations. So you can see there a lot of people voting for institutions in North America. You can see a lot of votes from Ireland going into the east coast of the US, for example, the thickest line there, a lot going to the west coast. Some very significant red lines from Ireland into Australia. So Irish scholars are voting for universities in Australia and America, primarily. Some very, very modest votes going into Southeast Asia and Japan there. And the green is the other way round. It's votes for Irish institutions. So you can see they're strong from America, fairly strong line there from Australia, and some reasonable voting from China. And really, that's the conclusion of my talk, is just simply to say China is the phenomenal success story of the rankings. Asia as a whole, East Asia in particular, is absolutely booming with investment, with development, with a thriving research culture driven primarily by China, but extraordinary success in Hong Kong, strength in Japan, of course, South Korea, phenomenal. Australia are actually doing very well. And I think one of the most powerful things we can achieve in global higher education, of course, is sharing knowledge, exchanging ideas, but collaborating. And I think a key to Ireland's further success is very, very simple. Really, really simple conclusion is collaborating and sharing more with East Asian nations, particularly China, could be very powerful for Ireland, because my sense is in the rankings, of course, we judge international collaboration, we judge reputation, that global footprint, but more importantly than reputation and collaboration, it's the quality of research. Internationally collaborative research is tackling the world's grand challenges. International research of this nature will make sure Ireland is contributing to new global knowledge, tackling the world's big future challenges, from obviously biotech right through to AI and pushing the fourth industrial revolution. So it's a very simple conclusion: work more, collaborate more between East Asia, China, and Ireland. Simple, straight, but I hope that gives a bit of a provocation to enjoy for the panel discussion. So the last slide was simply a contact and a thank you to invite you to communicate with me directly. But I'm delighted to hand over to Tom, I think, who's chairing the discussion in the panel, and I'll stay around for the panel as well to contribute any thoughts. But thanks for your attention, and delighted to hand over to the panel.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this panel discussion of the Asian Matters Ireland China Business Summit. The focus of our discussion, as noted in the program, is rethinking higher education partnerships post-COVID. To set the scene somewhat, I'd like to just make a couple of introductory comments. Really, I suppose, given the importance of higher education to economic and social success and development, governments around the world are currently, and indeed have been for some time, rethinking, reviewing higher education, the organization of it and the funding of it, and of course including the international dimension, which is extremely important in many respects, one of which Phil Beatty has just in fact outlined. The COVID-19 pandemic has of course added an extra layer of immediacy to that rethinking, but also an extra layer of complexity, I think. In the context of Irish Asia, and particularly Irish Chinese relationship, our internationalization policies for higher education focus on the benefits of it, that internationalization brings in terms of cross-cultural engagement, understanding, the opportunity to build networks of influence and friendship between countries, as well, of course, as the financial benefits that can be enjoyed both by international students and their host university or college. So the panel has just heard from Phil Beatty with a very strong focus there on university rankings, and we can come back to that when our other panel members have spoken. Rankings obviously have a very key role to play in international education. I'll be interested, Phil, later just to ask you how the pandemic and the health-related concerns of would-be students, how that would influence their approach to the rankings and to international education. Before that, though, we will hear from a distinguished panel of Irish experts on key aspects of developing partnerships between Ireland and China. As each speaker makes his or her presentation, I will, in all probability, ask or pose a question or make a comment. But in addition, very crucially for those of you who are participating, there will be an opportunity at the end of the panel, well, before the panel session ends, but as the panel members have spoken, to throw the discussion open to the floor, or I suppose to the virtual floor this morning. So let's go straight to the panel then. Our first presenter this morning is Dr. Barry O'Connor. Barry is president of Cork Institute of Technology. Good morning, Barry. It's good to see you again. Apart from being president of Cork Institute of Technology, through Barry's leadership, the Institute is about to become part of the Munster Technological University, along with his partner institute, Tralee. So good to see you, Barry, and I'll hand over to you for.
Good morning, Tom. my colleagues. And Phil, very interesting presentation. I guess the real, I think the real value. Okay, there's a benchmarking exercise involved in the rankings game, but I suppose the main, I would say that there are two aspects to it. First of all, it's about attracting international students. The other side of it, though, is I think they're very big in the States as well, where people do travel, and people will go to, whether it's Stanford or Michigan State or God knows what else, depending on the rankings in a particular area. I think the whole COVID business now has really upset the international market, and again, it does actually give us a chance here in Ireland in terms of getting on that global market for international students. But I think one thing is really important. If you take CIT as being the single biggest engineering school on the island of Ireland, when we look at STEM, where again the STEM it generates a lot of research, a lot of applied research, and it's the mainstay of any manufacturing economy. The figures out there, which I think go as well with what you're talking about. A study done a couple of years back was predicting the number of STEM graduates as science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. The number of STEM graduates which would come out of China by 2030 would amount to 37% of the world's STEM graduates. Throw in India, that's another 27%, which gives you about up to 64%, or 2/3 of the STEM graduates will be in Asia, whereas the total for Europe predicted in 2030 is only 4%, and 1% extra in the UK. So on the basis of developing a strong research base, we're way behind in terms of supporting our STEM activities here in Ireland and in Europe generally. And in fairness, that does come back into the whole, that if STEM and research gets you up the rankings as it should do, and also contributes to the economy, which is probably more important to my view, then I think we do need to put a lot more resourcing into STEM. Get us up the rankings, and at the same time, it will generate the reputation and the attractiveness for international students. So that I leave it at that for now. Tom, thanks.
Thank you, Barry. And just can I just, since I have you, so to speak, I have your ear. As I said today in introducing you, you are, due to your great leadership, you are now about to create a technological university in the southwest of Ireland as of 1st of January. Would you like to comment on what a technological university, and particularly the Munster Technological University, can specifically offer to Chinese students? I think Chinese students, and indeed increasingly more students, are very career focused, and so how do you see the technological university contributing to that?
Well, I think, Tom, with the MTU, Tom, I think we have a unique mix, because we'll have the mix of a very strong business faculty with engineering and science. And again, I go back to it and make no excuses for it. It's not just science for the science's sake or engineering. It's science coupled with a business focus. And again, we would have a very strong pillar right now between Tralee and ourselves in terms of engaging with industries. So I think what we do have to offer for Chinese students, and indeed we've had quite a number of students so far from India, from Vietnam as well, is that we can get them placed in industry in their undergraduate programs because we have very strong connections with them. Similarly, a few years back I was in Singapore, and again, a lot of the companies which are in Singapore are here in Munster as well. So it's that connection with industry, it's the relevance and the professional focus of our degree programs. But the witch's pinch, so to speak, the extra piece we have then is the whole area of creativity in terms of music and fine art, which gives that innovation spark to students. So it's not just hard engineering and hard business, it's a mixture supported by creativity, by culture, by tourism and so on. So I think there's a unique, we did not invent the notion of a technological university. They're all over Europe for quite a long time, but it's that focus on industry and profession-based education. And right now, within the MTU consortium, Stonefield University, we have at least 60 professional bodies accrediting our degrees. As well as the academic standing, they have professional standing as well. So I think that is a unique offering, and add in the cultural piece as well. And I think we're on a winning combination there, Tom.
Thanks, Barry. And as you're there, I have a question from the audience, so to speak, which I think you're in a good position to answer. Phil had talked earlier about collaborating on research with Chinese institutions as a driver of success in rankings. Has Cork IT had any experience in that area?
Indeed, we have, Tom, through our Nimbus and our Embedded Systems Engineering Research Centre. We hosted a major conference last year with InnoCare and other colleagues from China. And the plan was that actually next month we were to be in China with the Asian edition of said program. So we do have focused research activities and engagements particularly with Chinese companies. And again, through Asia Matters over the last number of years, we've continued to build up these strengths. We don't go for a shotgun approach. We pick up with partners who are like-minded individuals, like-minded institutions. So we don't. It's not a shotgun approach. We target particular companies and particular institutions. And again, I say as well in terms of Cork City itself, is actually twinned with Shanghai, as you know. So we have strong connections there with Shanghai, going back a good number of years. And our colleagues inside University College Cork have a Confucius Chair inside there. So again, there's a strong but very focused connection with China across the Munster region here, Tom.
That's splendid, Barry. Thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to move on then to Regina Moran. Regina is the chair of the Technological Higher Education Association. Is Regina with us? I just don't see her on my screen, that's all. You are. Thank you, Regina.
Hi there. I'm just, yeah.
Regina is having some technical difficulties, I think. Okay, I think we'll move on and Regina can join us in a moment. Xiaoling Liu is the chair of the Association of Chinese Professionals in Ireland and is part of the Technological University of Dublin. So give us your perspective.
Yes, hi, and thank you for inviting me to be here. And also Phil's presentation is very interesting. And yes, for myself, as a chairperson of the Association of Chinese Professionals, I do have a few ideas on what do Chinese students and the parents find attractive in pursuing higher education in Ireland, for example. I think safe and friendly environment is one of the key criteria for them to choose Irish higher education. And also the hub for large innovative technology companies, which bring more career opportunities. And it's really attractive as well. And also another good thing about Irish education institution is many universities or institutes, they have work placement programs and students actually be able to go to the real world and to learn some real experience apart from the normal education. And this is another very attractive point. And of course, language advantage for Irish universities. After Brexit, I think Ireland maybe is the only English-speaking countries. And certainly we can do better for the future.
Thank you. On that question of work placement, it is a very positive element of our international education strategy. Do you know if many students who take a work placement actually stay on beyond their studies and indeed stay on beyond the period allowed for graduates? In other words, I'm thinking here of the role of...
You mean from the job?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And yes, because for many Chinese students, when they landed in Ireland, they're very fresh here. They have not very much knowledge about Ireland, about Western culture, country, and the systems. When they actually go to the work placement, they be able to work in the real working environment. And many of them actually worked very hard. And also company like them. And many of them even got job offer before they graduate.
Yeah.
And also many of them gain some knowledge. It's really help them, for example, particularly to do final year project, for example. They have a lot of real ideas get from the work placement. And another thing is not every Chinese families are wealthy families, and some of them, they got grandparents' money, from parents' money, uncle, auntie's money, and send them to Ireland. And they work half a year, 6 months in the company. It's really a little bit of financial pressure to them as well. So it's really benefit students. We see students benefit from there.
Have you seen so far much impact from the COVID pandemic on the attraction of Chinese students? And what's TU Dublin doing specifically to counteract, I suppose, any negative impact of the pandemic?
Yeah, this is a hard time to everybody, to every organizations. Yes, and our university did they have worked very, very hard to try to continue focus on ensuring the safety of the student and provide comprehensive services to them. But still, sometimes not everything is perfect. You know, even yesterday I heard a story. One student arrived in Paris already, but the program canceled. So that things are happening, but everybody still, we are delighted that we still see lots of international students willing to take part, study in Ireland, and that is a good sign. And certainly I think Irish government should invest in more understanding of what makes Chinese students different and valuable. And also maybe invest more in university, particularly improve Irish university at the World University rankings. And the Chinese parents and the students do take this ranking seriously. And we know the ranking is not everything, but it is something very important. Or maybe we could ask Phil to add a friendly environment as one of the criteria. Irish University definitely will win out.
Well, you'll get no argument from me, Cindy, about the desirability of the government investing more in higher education. I'll be coming later also to Gemma, Dr. Gemma Irvine. I'd like Gemma, if you would also comment on that issue around how we can create safe spaces for our international students. I think it's a big priority. I understand that Regina is available on the phone. Technology doesn't allow her to be seen.
Hi, Tom.
But Regina, great, you're there. As I said earlier, Regina is chairs the Technological Higher Education Association. Also, Regina, of course, has had a stellar career in industry with very senior positions in Fujitsu and Vodafone. So, Regina.
Yeah, I suppose I was kind of thinking of the global war for talent, and how does Ireland attract, the world's best talent. And I suppose if I think about rankings, Phil mentioned that we love rankings. In the recent Global Talent Competitiveness Index, which is published every year, it's a 132 nation field. Although we rose one notch, I think, to 15 places, some of the feedback that we got from that process was about us significantly improving our performance on the likes of gender equality and female graduates. So I think if we want to raise our rank as a talent magnet, as it were, in that, because I think people do look at, certainly industry does look at that index as one source of feedback. I think the other thing that we can do is, if you think about the development, Tom, of artificial intelligence, I mean, impacting not just the nature of work, but workplace practices, corporate structures, even innovation ecosystems. I think to compete for talent, and I suppose it does back into some of the points made on research as well, I think we need to transform both our formal and informal learning structures to meet the needs created by this emerging AI-driven world. And I do think there is an opportunity potentially for Ireland to try and get ahead in that game. And I think it has been mentioned a few times, and just by Xiaoling, I think we need to really continue to market the opportunities here. I mean, when you're in Ireland, I've walked abroad a bit, and as many people have at this conference, you think kind of Ireland is kind of the centre of the world, but actually we constantly need to keep ourselves as a nation to attract talent both into the universities and into industry. We need to keep ourselves front of mind for these potential students and tech experts to see Ireland as a place to come. I think we need to use digital, social media tools, whatever tools that we can, basically to increase our reach and to increase the market awareness out there across the globe of Ireland as a location of choice, both for students, for research, and also for industry. Because if we can create that kind of ecosystem, a stronger ecosystem, it'll help both.
I want to actually explore that last point because I think it's very interesting. We will probably come to a discussion at some point around the impact of technology in terms of international students and the teaching and learning of international students. But a question has come in from the listeners as to the use of technology in developing partnerships between Ireland and China in business terms. Is that something that is doable, is practical, is it happening?
Yeah, I think it is happening on a certain scale, Tom, but I actually think in a strange way, the COVID pandemic, although it's challenged leaders both in industry and in the HEIs, I suppose, first of all, to stabilise and then prepare for the future, I think there are emerging possibilities. I mean, virtual teams can be more easily created now. And I think, indeed, we need to collaborate to survive. I think greater cooperation between industry and education are the first front here in Ireland to work on solutions the problems generated by the COVID-19 in terms of connectivity, etc. I'm suffering a little bit from it myself this morning, as you can see. But still, I'm still able to converse with you. And I think virtual teams can be created more easily now than ever before, in fact. And I think no one company or no one institution has all the answers to solution some of these problems that are being created. So I think there is a huge possibility now. And I think people are more open to it, certainly in industry, and I think across the board, to work in a virtual world and work collaboratively and open our horizons to what's possible by looking east.
Is there a possibility through that mechanism, so the use of technology or otherwise indeed, to significantly increase the level of foreign direct investment from China into Ireland? We're very familiar, of course, with the US model of foreign direct investment here, and that has been a very strong focus of our agencies such as IDA and others. Are we in danger of missing a trick if we don't focus a bit more on China?
Yeah, I think we are. I mean, it's both a huge market, if you like, from an Enterprise Ireland point of view for Irish companies. It's also a huge source, as we've heard earlier, of research and innovation. And I think it is, I think you know, it was interesting when Phil showed that chart with the red lines and the green lines earlier, and the very, very strong connection to particularly the East Coast of America. But I think, you know, in a global war for talent and in the global war for, you know, for industry and growth, and indeed in the global war for students, I think we have to look east as well as west. And China is, you know, I mean, it's got thousands of years of innovation, I suppose, and I think we have no choice. I think it's very important that we look east as well as west.
Yes, great. Thank you, Regina. We may well come back to you later on, but right now we'll move on to Brian McGuire, who works with Quality and Qualifications Ireland. Brian, I'll hand over to you.
Great, thank you, Tom, and thank you, Phil, for your very stimulating and somewhat provocative presentation of where Ireland sits in this universe of world rankings. I work for Quality and Qualifications Ireland, which is the national agency responsible for the external quality assurance of our higher education and further education systems, and the institutions in those systems. But my first response, actually, and first reaction to what you presented there, focused on the system. You know, you pointed out that a number of the Chinese and other rising Asian countries have focused on identifying champions and really investing heavily in their star universities and star players. One of the features of the Irish system and our approach to quality assurance and our approach to funding, research funding, investment, and so on, has been to level up, to ensure that all of our institutions are of a high standing. So in Ireland, all 8 of our research universities are in the top 600. There are no laggards when you move to, and that they account for 57% of our student population. And then when you move to the technological sector, again with a different emphasis, it's not going to feature as highly in the rankings because, of course, the emphasis is on their regional mission, their applied industry and support. But there again, the technological universities is in the top 1,000, even on that global scale. So I think this has been a characteristic of the Irish system and the Irish policy has been to ensure that all of our students, whether they're home students or students coming from abroad, get educated in an institution that really is globally competitive, if not actually right up there at the top of the tables. So that's a characteristic of our system, and it's something that hasn't happened by accident. It's been a design. Rather than have excellence initiatives, we have excellence initiatives for research projects, but not for individual universities that are labeled as you're going to be it. And I think that that's something that on an international scene, students who are coming to Ireland, the overall package is come to Ireland and you will be guaranteed that you're not going to fall between the cracks. You're not going to pick the wrong institution or pick the wrong program and then find that you've made a terrible mistake and invested time and money in something that's not going to yield a lifelong return. And capitalizing on that then, as well as having an institution that's reliable and a program that's reliable, you then have, as an international student, what Cindy referred to there, the stay back option. So all international students who do an undergraduate degree can stay back for a year. If they do a master's degree or doctoral program, they can stay back for 2 years to really consolidate in a workplace the learning that they've taken in the Irish institutions. I too would like to respond. There was the question there in the chat about how the Irish institutions responded to the COVID crisis. Over the summer, QQI conducted an evaluation of the impact of the pivot to online learning, which happened, of course, so suddenly last spring. And we found that the vast majority of institutions and of programs were able to successfully introduce online programs, even at quite short notice. And why is that? I think that's because in some ways the pandemic and the push to online learning has accelerated a trend that's been there for a long time, emphasizing more active learning on the part of students, the use of learning technology to support the inquiry-based and student-centered learning to achieve learning outcomes. And the individual institutions, when they had to, for example, change their assessment techniques, because they'd already defined exactly what they wanted from students, what they were expecting students to be able to demonstrate, were then able to turn around and do assessments that still managed to confirm that the students had reached those outcomes, rather than say, just because they couldn't go through traditional examinations, there are other ways. And we're seeing that that evaluation, for example, found that over 60% of students were considered that the learning resources that were made available to them, even at quite short notice, were of high quality. And as we move forward into the next session, the institutions have been spending the last number of months trying to reframe their programs in such a way that they can offer a balance, and that balance between what's on campus and online has to be set up in such a way that it can shift as the pandemic shifts. So I'm speaking to you from Dublin. We're now at a higher tier of public health restrictions than the rest of the country, and the institutions have correspondingly adopted their programs in these weeks so that the students' learning isn't interrupted, even if individual activities are changed. So those are both a reaction and a prognosis on how we're moving forward.
Thank you, Brian. And I have a question here from our audience. It's how much more important does e-learning become for higher education institutions in the new COVID world? And to some extent, you've answered this. But how does this change the international engagement for universities?
Well, as Cindy said earlier, the international student experience is in part about what they get in terms of educational content and educational exchange, but it's also partly about a cultural immersion that students get when they come to a country. And so the international students' experience is constrained because the social activities on campus are restricted, and their opportunities for off-campus casual work and leisure activities are constrained just now. But on the whole, what we've seen is, again, last term, that a number of students went home to their home countries and were able to continue their studies from home. So I think in the future, we will see a much greater blend of in-country and home country learning. So until now, for example, if you talked about a student blending their experience, there might have been a 2+2 program where you do the first 2 years of an undergraduate program in one country and then you come to another country. I think with the greater use of campus independent technologies, that we will see a greater mix of coming and going, students over time spending a number of weeks or a number of months or a number of years in a visiting country, and that universities are already forming these more flexible partnerships where they distribute students depending on where they're at in their program of studies. We're seeing this particularly, for example, in the European Universities Initiative across Europe, but I think we're also going to see it in which there are 8 of the Irish higher education institutions taking part. And I think we're going to see much more of this too in the collaborations between Irish institutions and institutions in Asia, and particularly in China, where we already have 14 of our Irish higher education institutions already have joint programs in China or joint campuses in China. And these links will become not only more extensive, but I think more flexible and more varied as we're able to exploit that distance independence that comes with e-learning.
Thank you, Brian. I have a question for Phil here that's coming in. As we're talking about this issue of e-learning and blended learning and quality, what prospect is there for the international rankings to take account of the quality of e-learning and blended learning, to take account of that in ranking institutions?
Yeah, it's an extraordinarily challenging one at the global level because the data availability is so patchy. So the world rankings, I think quite rightly, focus very much on research excellence. We have metrics of the teaching environment, which are proxies, faculty-student ratios, resources, the learning environment. But this is a massive challenge. We've started to try and address this on a country-by-country level. So in the US, we collaborate with the Wall Street Journal on a domestic ranking that's much more focused on teaching excellence and teaching outcomes. And we can actually, we survey 100,000 students a year about their engagement, about their not satisfaction, which is the controversial metric in the UK that the government's now reviewing. We look at student engagement rather than satisfaction, and we can apply that across all the different forms of learning. So it's, how much are you stretch challenged, critical thinking, access to tutors and information. But it's a huge problem because it's very difficult to reach the volumes of students that provide meaningful results and to get statistically valid outcomes. So we're doing it fairly patchily, country by country. But yes, it's the biggest challenge to rankers before the pandemic is how do you understand the learning environment for blended programs, remote programs, compared to the standard campus model. One thing we are doing, which I think is really exciting, is we're trying to build, or we've just soft launched a new platform called THE Campus, where we're asking scholars to share best practice. So we're building up a really rich picture of excellence in the delivery of online learning, which will be a mass open platform for the academics themselves to share good practice in the delivery of teaching. And we hope at some point down the road that will give us a bit of a taxonomy, the beginnings of a picture of good provision in this area. But yeah, it's a huge challenge for rankers, and it's something that we're scratching our heads around right now.
Yeah, and of course, if the predictions hold true that that basically there's no returning to normality post-COVID. In other words, there will be an increasing use of technology, an increasing use of e-learning, blended learning in higher education, then inevitably this is an issue for all its complexity that the ranking systems are going to have to grapple with, because it'll be part of the new normal, I suppose. So thank you, Phil, for that.
Yeah, sure.
That's great. Gemma, Dr. Gemma Irvine is Vice President for Equality and Diversity in Maynooth. Could we have your thoughts, Gemma?
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Tom, and thank you, Phil, for your presentation. Maynooth University, it's the fastest growing university in Ireland, placed in the top 50 global universities under 50 years old in the Times Higher Education World Rankings. So we have a unique perspective, I think, because we can blend the new with the old. We've traced our origins over 200 years of education with the foundation of the Royal College of St. Patrick. So we have both the new perspective and the old. Specifically, I was asked about the ethnic diversity as a concept of the university experience, and particularly for Irish students. So I might just speak to that first. Obviously, ethnic diversity is very important. We aim to reflect the diversity in Ireland from the hinterland or the community and use that as a guide, as one element. The second is that we aim for our students to be global citizens. So I'll speak to those 2 points separately. In Ireland, our community, our school community is exceptionally diverse and increasing all the time. So it's very important for us to see the people in the secondary schools coming through and going on to third level. Otherwise, we'll be missing out on potential talent. So this is a key focus for us, and we do a lot of outreach to the secondary schools to encourage all their students to come to third level. But then once they get to us, we're aiming for those students to be global citizens. So we have a really strong focus on internationalization. Now, this is both the curriculum and it's the holistic experience on campus. We have a national international education strategy that the government has set key targets and goals for us to increase our number of international students in Ireland. So this is both students coming in and also our students and staff going out on exchanges to other countries, for example, Erasmus. But we also aim to make sure our teaching content reflects a wide range of contributors. We're very aware that it's been dominated by the global north historically, and we're looking to change that. We're also looking at our campus experience, that it's internationally informed. We want our students to be citizens of the world with an awareness for the other countries and cultures. So not only do we have specific courses offered, for example, our School of Business and their international business program, but also the cultural awareness events. And we work closely with our students' union in this regard. So we've got key national days that we'd celebrate. And Chinese New Year, we also have the Chinese Society on campus and Japanese Culture Society as well. So there is a great awareness on campus of trying to bring that ethnic diversity as a strength. And that speaks very much to my role. Being a Vice President for Equality and Diversity, I see the diversity as a strength. It's intrinsic to the spirit of a university, where we come together with our different backgrounds, experiences, and hopes to challenge our thinking and to stimulate innovation. And we're also very keen to establish those international partnerships, as Brian was mentioning. Maynooth University has an International College of Engineering at Fuzhou University, and that will see 1,200 Chinese students graduate with the Maynooth University degree in computer science, electronic engineering, and robotics over the next 4 years. So this is an excellent example of international cooperation, but it's a powerful model of the third level internationalization. So we can fully engage and learn from the local culture, the local academic environment, and then strive together for that world-class development with an exchange of knowledge, collaborating on research in a deeper and more sustainable way. So the other thing I was asked to speak of was the impact of COVID. And as Cindy was speaking as well, what impact is this going to have on our students, and particularly our international students? Well, 1/3 of our international students who are new entrants in Maynooth are from China. And we know it's going to be very unusual with COVID this year, but as much as possible, we're trying to keep the university experience the same great courses, the same great content. We've just had to rethink our approach to delivering that and trying to make sure the students are connected. So as well as the physical preparations on campus, so everyone's safe, we've been providing additional supports for international students, a personal approach to bringing them from the airport, for example, to Maynooth University. We've been doing orientation this week with small groups of students to help walk them around the campus so they're familiar and enable students to see themselves when they come to campus, that help with that sense of belonging. So that's visually in posters or the role models who are walking them around, delivering content. So from that point of view, our international office has been working very hard, closely with the students, and virtual live sessions, as well as a personal approach, if anybody has any questions. But this year, we're also going to set up a student ethnic diversity forum. And this is where, speaking to Cindy's point, we're going to have direct input into policies and practice. So we're asking our students for their lived experience, so we can learn about them and hear about their needs, and so that we can aim to support them better. So all of that is what we're hoping will help the students this year in a very unusual time.
Thank you, Gemma. And do you anticipate this being, I suppose, a short-term issue impacting upon the number of international students and therefore your diversity? Or do you think that there's going to be a more long-term impact with less international students on campus and perhaps more international students joining programs through various kinds of e-learning, blended learning programs? Is it I suppose I'm asking you, what level of anxiety have you about this issue, as given your role as Vice President for Diversity?
Yeah, I think in the midst of the crisis, there was concern that this would heavily impact on our international students. And as Barry has spoken about, that sense of what it would mean for the people choosing to come to Ireland and what type of experience we could give them. I think it is definitely going to change the way that we think about delivering our education and our collaboration with our students. So as Brian has said, we absolutely are more likely to see collaborations that are virtually based rather than physically being exchanges with international students. We were quite pleased, I think, to see there was still great demand from international students who wanted to come to our university this year. I think Ireland has built a really strong brand. I think people have a lot of confidence in our education as being quality, but also our ability to look after the students when they're here. We're very welcome and friendly. So I think as a place, if you were going to pick to send your children or to choose as a student, Ireland is still very attractive in that regard. I would like to see the COVID as not only changing the way we think about delivery of education, but pushing us to act on it. So there is a lot of added value that we've actually gotten out of this experience from having to move so rapidly to an online learning environment. And particularly from a diversity point of view, it's benefited a lot of our students, particularly those from disadvantaged backgrounds, those with disabilities. There's a lot of added value I think we can bring out of this too.
Great. Now, this issue of distance learning inevitably has excited quite a bit of questioning from our audience. An interesting question here is, you know, we've spoken about the possibilities and indeed the potential of e-learning, blended learning. The question is, how do Asian communities feel about it? The questioner goes on to say, Asian communities are very tech literate, but they may see education specifically as very much classroom focused and not something you can do online. So any views that you would have, Phil?
Just a story from Tsinghua University, actually. I was talking to the president there, Kui Yong, a few weeks ago at one of our summits at Times Higher Education. And he said the pivot to remote learning at Tsinghua in Beijing had actually increased student engagement. And we had a university leader survey that Times Higher Education carried out in the sort of March, April period, which had some similar results from Japan. So actually a lot of anecdotal evidence suggests that Asian students who perhaps, you know, tend to be a bit more conservative in terms of the way they consume and regard their teachers, you know, perhaps slightly less interactive in a classroom setting, seem to have been emboldened slightly, and the screen, as Kui Yong said, it has become more of a bridge rather than a barrier. It's actually opened up engagement and increased student engagement. So there's great potential, I think, with the right technology, if you're not just putting a lecture on Zoom, to enhance the student experience for particular groups, and certainly the evidence from East Asia suggests that.
Darlene, have you a perspective on that, and Barry?
And yes, I actually agree with Phil. Even yesterday, I was giving a lecture on Bengal. Normally, if I'm in the real classroom, very few students would ask questions because maybe they feel a little bit embarrassed, particularly for Chinese students. Almost none of them will ask questions unless I ask questions to them. But in the online learning environment, actually, they are more relaxed and ask more questions. So we got more engagement in that sense. Well, I'm not saying online teaching is better than the real one, but from that perspective, actually, we can see the trend, actually, Chinese students willing to engage more from the online teaching.
Thank you. Barry, did you want to make a comment there?
Yes, the Chair. Just one experience we had in terms of, say, for Academic Council, to Cindy's point there, we had over 100 people online for our first online Academic Council back in April, I think it was, and making use of chat and putting in questions and having an efficient chairman, which of course I am, people came back afterwards saying it was the best academic council they were ever at. And why? Because they could get their point across, be it on the chat or by carefully controlled, people coming in and only one voice at a time. But to go back to the other point, and I'm struck by Phil saying that the UK government are looking at student engagement rather than student satisfaction. In our survey with our interested or incoming international students, they would all have said that they would prefer to be on campus, in other words, starting semester 2 rather than semester 1, to get that experience. And let's be honest, for Ireland Inc. down the line, if no matter where the students are coming from, be it China or France or Germany, it's the long-term links they make on a personal basis with each other and with the local community that will benefit the long-term, we mentioned earlier with Regina, the long-term overseas investment from China into Ireland, or indeed from Ireland into China, because the personal connection is very important. And I know from dealing with colleagues in France as well, go back to Jim's point, that they do have a specific task that they deploy, which is international at home. And, and that is particularly strong, relevant right now when students cannot go abroad, that there should be a strong emphasis on internationalization. But again, I go back to it, you cannot beat having international students on the campus to actually really be the nucleus of the international at home. Thanks,
Barry. Thank you, Dr. Barry. And I have a very specific question for you, Barry and Regina, since you have the talking stick. How does Ireland rank for engineering, and how can we create joint research and courses with China? So a very specific focus there on engineering. Barry, if you would start, and then Regina, you might give us your views as well.
Well, again, I would point to the niche areas of research that we've done in terms of electronic engineering, in terms of biological sciences, in terms of the whole pharma side, which at the same time has given the embeddedness for multinationals in Ireland and has attracted them to Ireland as well. So I think we are very strong in niche areas, particularly in applied research, which is what companies are after. And it's not to do checkbook research for companies, but we have a very strong food science research base, electronic engineering, cybersecurity, ICT. And I think, if I go back to it, I think it does go down to the personal connection, which we had at our conference here in Cork earlier in the year, before the whole COVID thing happened, with our colleagues in Innoker and so on, that I think it's personal connections will make this so we have some very high-flying engineering and applied science researchers, and the whole biotech sphere as well. There are specific areas, and I think that it is for us then and our colleagues, hopefully through Asia Matters and through Chinese Embassy and so on, to make these specific and particular connections and to build on that. Again, I keep saying it is not the shotgun approach, it's to try and pick out where we have common purpose and where we have complementary skills. And again, it is bringing people from China to here, for Irish people to go to China, because again, and I know we're a different generation, possibly workers around the table, or students coming into universities nowadays are having another life entirely in the dimension of social media and internet and so on. But what we've picked up, say, from last semester, and a lot of colleagues have the same opinion, in terms of I won't say it was easy, but it was easier to keep things going when things went belly up back in March when we shut things down. It's easier to keep things going than to get things started. And there's must be a lot of personal connection to get things started first. Sure.
Thank you, Barry. I want to get Regina in, and Regina, you're going to have the last word because we're coming right up.
Yeah. Well, you can't see me, but hopefully you can hear me, Tom.
I can hear you very well, Regina. Thank you.
Yeah, I just building on Barry's point. I mean, in terms of engineering, I mean, I think my own view. I mean, I did electronic engineering in Barry's own institute there in Cork, and I went to Waterford as well. So I came up through the IoT route. And I actually agree with the point about the applied and the practical. I mean, Ireland is a relatively small country. China is a very large country. I think we need to pick our areas that we're going to be strong in engineering and science. We can't do scattergun. I absolutely agree with Barry on that. We need to pick a few areas. I mentioned artificial intelligence actually earlier because that is a new wave. It's the fourth industrial revolution. We need to get on that wave. We can't be good at everything. We're just too small. So I think we need to go deep and then build those connections with China in those specific areas, because we don't have the resources to do anything other than that. I think we have a very strong engineering base, and we have a very strong multinational base here. There's more than 1,500 multinational companies are in Ireland, and it's a great ecosystem. I do think that we can build on that, but I think we do need to make sure that we don't go too wide, we go deep, and we are excellent. Just to Phil's point earlier, there's no point in being half good at everything. I think we need to be deep and brilliant at some things and channel our resources to where we can have the biggest impact.
I like that. Irish higher education, deep and brilliant. That could be our motto or our logo. Folks, we have to call it a day there. Thank you very much. Thank you especially to Phil for your keynote, and that started us off. And thank you to all of the panel. My apologies to those of you who submitted questions that I didn't have time to come to, but it's always a good sign of a conversation if you leave it with some questions or issues or comments that you didn't get a chance to say. So thank you all very, very much. Bye-bye.